Hi, I'm Gretchen Lida, and welcome to HN Reads. This book's book of the month is Kept Animals by Kate Milliken, and I am so excited to have her on the show. Everybody, welcome Kate.
Hi,
Hi, Kate.
Gretchen.
So nice to have you. I'm going to read the amazing bio that I have of you because it's so fantastic. So this is Kate Milliken. Kate Milliken is the author of the 2013 Iowa Short Fiction Award-winning collection of short stories, If I'd Known You Were Coming. A graduate of the Bennington College Writing Seminars, she has received fellowships from the Vermont Studio Center and the Tin House Summer Writers Workshop. And her short stories have appeared in Fiction, Ziza, Santa Monica Review, and New Orleans Review, among others. Her work has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, anthologized in California Prose Dictionary, her new writing from the Golden State, and received a runner-up for the Rick Moranis Award as well as the Dana Award for the novel. Kate grew up riding horses in Topanga Canyon, California, in the early 1990s, and it was to that time and those dusty trails that she returned as an inspiration for her debut novel, Kept Animals, praised by Janet Fitch in the New York Times Book Review and named by O Magazine as the LGBTQ novel that will change the literary landscape in 2020. Kept Animals is a multi-generational story of friends and lovers, mothers and daughters, and a tragic accident that changes the lives of three very different families forever. Kept Animals was just longlisted for the 2020 First Novel Prize from the Center of Fiction. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. That was a mouthful.
It was so awesome, though. I mean, there's a push card on there. There's the New York Times. There's O Magazine. Like, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
And would you like to start with a reading for us?
Oh, sure. So here's the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess usually I read from the beginning of the book, but since I'm amongst horse enthusiasts here, I thought I would start with a section that takes place during the 1 3-day event that happens in the book. So I have to set you up with some character knowledge in order to read this part. I hope that's okay. So most importantly, the book, one of the main protagonists is Rory. She's 15, an aspiring photographer, but she's also a stable hand. So she doesn't ordinarily compete. And she's got this horse that was bought at auction, who she's been conditioning and riding in the hills. And finally, she's made her way to this event. And she's learned most of what she knows by watching others. So she's in Fresno, and she's competing against two twins that she's befriended, June and Wade Fisk. And as the scene opens, she's going up to go watch their cross-country ride ahead of doing her own. The only other names you need to know are the Fisk twins. Their father, Preston Fisk, has just arrived at the event. And the other name you need to know is Robin Sharp, who's their trainer. So I will read this little section from that. The cross-country course in Fresno consisted of 24 fences over 3 miles of uneven, rolling terrain, grass to sand to leaf-littered woods. Their running order was the opposite of the day before. Wade up first, then June, then Rory. Rory waited for Wade and June to leave for the warm-up ring and then steered Chap to the peak of a hill that looked out over the first 6 fences, hoping that watching a few other runs would inspire both of them. The first was a girl on a long-legged bay gelding, whose big round stride covered ground as seamlessly as wheels. As they turned toward the water obstacle, Rory could see the pair out of Adler's barn, that Kelly green HR insignia on the saddle pad, Heritage Ranch. The girl was a small, tight fit atop the bay, bouncing like a spring up and over each fence, and she took the embankment without any hesitation, relaxing her hold on the reins and inviting the bay's drop into the muddy water. Just like that, Rory thought. She watched each ride as if through a camera's lens, looking for the nearly imperceptible shifts in their bodies. Chap pawed the ground, growing eager. The announcer called Wade Fisk to the starting box, and the countdown to his run began. 10, 9, 8. Chap pricked her ears, and with her calves, Rory said, "Not yet." 3, 2, 1. Rory checked her watch so she could track Wade's speed, then swung her leg forward, reaching down to tighten Chap's girth. Someone was yelling, "Get back on!" It was Robin, and Wade was on the ground in front of the falling trees oxer, fence 3. Journey's nostrils were flared, a spooked horse, empty stirrups swinging at his sides. Shit. Rory scanned the spectators, finding Preston Fisk. His expression was stony, unreadable. Wade had his whip in his hand and he struck his boot with it, Journey's head jerking back, startled by the sound. Rory flashed on Carlotta. Oh, sorry, she's the barn owner that Rory's worked for most of her life. Rory flashed on Carlotta the time she dismounted one of her horses and started whipping it, repeatedly, lashing the air until its legs were braided with blood. That was the day they'd known she wasn't well enough to work horses anymore. Breathe, Rory thought. In her better days, Carlotta had always told them to breathe in unison with their horses, to try to sync up their heartbeats. There was low applause from the crowd as Wade remounted. He steered Journey around and picked up a canter, standing in his stirrups, then dropping down to his saddle abruptly, as if he could launch Journey up and over the fence. Rory knew then that Journey would refuse again. He came from a long line of winning sport horses, never having to prove himself, to grow bigger or try harder, a tin man of a horse, an echo chamber for Wade's bravado. On the third approach to the fence, Rory watched Preston Fisk, seeing his shoulders lift ever so slightly, trying to hoist his son up and over the oxer with his will, and then the twitch of defeat when it didn't work. Preston adjusted his shirt cuffs and walked away. This third refusal meant elimination. Rory watched Wade dismount and leave Journey on the course, discarding him. It was Tomas who jogged out to retrieve him while the announcer said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the heat continues to make even our top contenders lose their cool." "Where the hell have you been?" Robin asked as Rory trotted into the warm-up ring. She had only 10 minutes to get Chap limber. June was already in the starting box, a single-minded look on her face. "You've got this," Rory called to her. "If you've been hiding, avoiding Wade and his dad, don't give it another thought. I can handle Preston Fisk," Robin said. Rory looked down at her. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't mean to hide." "Never mind," Robin barked. "Get moving. You're all falling apart on me." Rory got in a dozen sprints up and down the warm-up ring. The mare was loosened up, even playful. Rory heard June's score come over the loudspeaker, clean over all the fences, and fast. "Don't be afraid to use those spurs," Robin said, steering Chap into the starting box. "Now we know why she's been so dull. So get after her, you hear me?" Rory felt the spurs on her heels, but she was sure she wasn't going to need them. Robin smacked Chap's haunches and the mare swung in, bobbing her head against the bit, her hooves prancing in place. 10, 9, 8, the announcer started. Rory ran a hand down Chap's neck, feeling the roiling muscle of her. "June's moved up with Wade out," Robin said. "No harm in giving her a run." 5, 4, 3, 2. Everything went silent, Rory hearing only the beat of her own and Chaparral's heart. 1. The two of them leapt onto the open green. Fences 1 and 2 were an easy opening combination, and now, 15 strides out from the falling tree's oxer, Rory realized she'd never started her stopwatch. She wouldn't know her pace, except to sense it, but she was up and over the oxer now, and she had a long, clear run of field ahead. She got up in her half seat and brought her whip around, cocking it like a jockey does. She'd never laid a whip to Chap like that, never would, but just having it there created a new current of electricity between them. She gathered the mare up for the ditch and palisade up and clear, then let her out again, hooves and pulse and wind. At the embankment into the water, Rory remembered the golden stitching of the HR rider, the poise of her seat, and then she was her, sitting deep into her saddle, letting Chap take control of the bit before leaping into the water as easy as a kid to a puddle. The cool of the water sprang up, the hit of swampy stink riding on with them. Chap had never run so fast or jumped so neatly. This was months of galloping in the hills paying off, of secretly jumping over fallen trees, of trusting one another. Chap jumped higher out here, an arc to her back that Rory levitated above ever so briefly, finding the balls of her feet against the stirrups, her thighs holding on. She scarcely touched the reins, and just after the angled combination, her crop fell away. Jump, land, gallop, jump, land, fly. It might not be so easy in the ring tomorrow, but now she was galloping through the finish line, knowing she had zero faults. Easing Chap back into a trot, she stood in her stirrups, listening for her final time over the loudspeaker. She'd been 5 seconds faster than June. Robin came running down the hill, pumping her hands in the air. I knew, she was shouting. I knew you had it in you. I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kate. I remember reading, I listened to the audiobook of the book first, and then I went back and read big sections of it. And I remember listening to that section the first time. And usually when I listen to books, part of what I love about audiobooks is that I can do I can clean or do other things. And that was one of those moments that I actually just stopped and didn't do anything. And was just listening to the book oh, is she gonna get it over?
Good.
So one of the things that's really lovely and vivid about the book is the eventing. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your own experience in the sport.
Sure. I started riding horses when I was 7 or 8, just, as kids do, a Western class. It was actually for a friend's birthday party, and was hooked. That first horse actually rolled over on me. As they will when you're that little, you're just a blip of a thing above this horse. His name was Tiny. I remember that very distinctly. And he was like a fjord, it was this ironic name as we give horses. And my mom, in that moment of me being rolled over and my leg pinned to the ground, was like, now you get back on, and I don't know. I think maybe thousands of dollars later, she may have really regretted that, but I didn't stop riding after that. So I started riding, and I'm so sorry, my dog is going crazy. Can you hear that? Let me.
Sorry. There is. Yeah.
It's like she knows fire.
It is a weird day. Don't worry about that.
She's totally just, she's alarmed. So I started. Then we moved. That was actually in Chicago. That first horse experience, and then we moved to LA, and I started riding at a barn in Topanga. I was 9 years old and just taking little school horse lessons, but it was an eventing barn, and I just ended up eventing because that was what I saw everyone doing, and I loved the elements of it, that it's this sort of 3-act show. Hold on, I'm going to give this dog a bone. I'm throwing her a bone in hopes that she'll behave for us. So I loved eventing. I loved the story of it because you've got that that first day of dressage is this dance between horse and rider. It's this real test of communication. And then you've got that second day of eventing that's cross country. That's this, kind of akin to this great conflict or, climax of action. And then you have jumping, which is where have you gotten through that whole story process? Have you stayed together? Are you still able to communicate? It's just the perfect arc of a 3-act show. It's pretty, I love 3-day eventing. I don't think I'd ever do it again, but it's such a beautiful sport.
Yeah. Does it, that arc that you're talking about, I was just listening to Brene Brown. Do you know who Brene Brown is?
Yeah, absolutely.
She was talking about how day 2 is always the hardest day. Day 2 is the day that you're the most fatigued and the most, even though the third day you should be, but it's that second day. Is that true of 3-day eventing as well? That day 2 is usually a strange day?
I think maybe it is a little bit strange because it's you have so much anxiety going into it there, and you've done so much preparation to get there. A lot of times you've traveled some distance, and there's all the anxiety of getting the horse there and being groomed and ready for that first day. And it's you're going into that day with your starting score. You already know where you're sitting. So it's almost you're competing with yourself at that point. It's I have this score and I've got to stay here at least, and hope that others fall off along the way, or not hope that anybody falls off, you know what I mean? But hope they fall out of the ribbons, as they say. But I could see how she would think that. I rode as a teenager competitively, and I think at that point in your life, you've got so much energy that maybe you're not that easily fatigued. I know we didn't get a lot of sleep when we were traveling for those 3-day events.
Right. Yeah. Horse shows and sleep, no matter the horse show, no sleep. There's
no
such
sleep.
thing
Yeah.
as sleep portions. Was it, so one of the things I also thought was really interesting about the novel is the way that, 1990s Topanga Canyon, California, there were like these extreme characters where you had the Fisk twins, who were the children of this extremely successful plastic surgeon, and then Vivian Price, and then who lives next door to Vivian Price is Rory, and Vivian Price is the child of, a famous movie star, and then up the hill is Rory, and Rory's the child of a bartender and a ranch hand, basically. Is that what it was like? Was that kind of like stratification that was kind of layered on top of each other a thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Sure. At horse shows, I think horses are an area where so many different people are brought together, right? And there is this hierarchy to who is there and competing. But I wanted to capture that particular time in Southern California. The early 90s were, they felt not as apocalyptic as this moment in our history, but there's a familiarity of this feeling. There's definitely a lot of tension. There's a lot of disparity economically, and there's fires. So that the fire of this book was based on my experience of a wildfire in 1993. That was that's the framework of the book, is these three families and how their lives intersect to basically start this real life wildfire that began in November 2nd, 1993. This fire started, and I knew that it had been pinned on arson. That was, they've always said it was an arson fire, but they never solved it. But it was also in the midst of, there were a dozen other fires that started that week, or the 12 days before. It was like just one fire after another, and it was sort of like all of us waiting for a fire to begin because the Santa Anas were blowing. We'd had 6 years of drought. Like, there was just this feeling of living in a tinderbox on so many levels, culturally, politically, so much tension in the air. This is the year after, the 92 riots, after the police officers who brutally beat Rodney King were acquitted. And then you've got, Proposition 187 on the other side of it, which was Pete Wilson's attempt to take an immigrant's right to an education and healthcare away. It was a proposition that he won re-election based on, very much foreshadowing policies we see Stephen Miller enacting today. So I wanted to give readers the feeling of what it was like to be in that time, but do it through an intimate story of these three very disparate families, June and Wade Fisk, who are very disconnected from their father, who really only cares about money, and Vivian Price, who's the daughter of this Hollywood actor, and her dissatisfaction in the world, even though it looks like she has everything. And then you have Rory, who's kind of the main character, coming to terms with her sexuality and her infatuation with Vivian, who lives down the hill. So that's like how I would summarize the book.
I'd say that, like, it's also interesting that you also broke it up into threes. There's like a trend of like that those are the three families. I also was thinking about like how Tomas's family fit into it as well. And him as a character. And he's also just so lovely throughout the book. Right. So it's interesting.
Well, it's funny because whenever I say it's about three families, in some way, I actually do mean the Flores family. Like, that's the Fisk family. The Fisk family is almost more of an ignition that brings the Prices, Tomas's family, and Rory's family together, the Scotts. So it's I say that, but I also know we positioned this book around three teenage girls. So I'm like, Tomas is a huge part of this story. So it's I'm going on script here, but that is the third family in my mind.
Yeah, I also love how Tomas is always so just matter of fact. Tomas works at the same bar that Rory does, and often is Wade's groom, right? And I like the way that he's always kind of you can just tell he's good with horses because he's always kind of quietly goes and gets things and then quietly brings them back. And it's like the writing there is wonderfully subtle with the way his character is written. So
I'm so glad.
I have a couple. I'm trying to decide which question I want to ask because there's two directions we could go. So the first one, I guess I'll go with this one, is so the barn itself becomes kind of the catalyst where everything centers around, right? And I was wondering if you could define intersectionality for our audience and explain why the barn is a place where intersectionality works.
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm not,
It's okay.
I might not be like, intersectionality is basically the idea that marginalization doesn't happen on this like single plane spectrum, that like if you're a woman of color and your experience in the world is twofold, if you're just feeling sexism as a woman, or if you're a woman of color and you're queer, that all of these things are compounded your marginalization and your experience of the world. So I was looking at the intersections of all these lives that have these disparate experiences. Tomas is the product of his mother's rape and his experience in the world. He has this really close connection with his mother, and it's one of the only mother-child relationships in the book that is really healthy, despite his origin story. So, I just wanted to like give that intimate experience of how very different all of these relationships can be based on the world as we know it. Things that have only become exacerbated over time, unfortunately. I did not anticipate that happening. But I think none of us anticipated a lot of things that have happened in the last 4 years. This book took me 10 years, and we actually sold it right before Trump was inaugurated. Not to get too much into politics, but unfortunately, it made the book a little bit more timely. And so that the barn becomes a place where you have economic hierarchies, you have cultural hierarchies. So that was how it became a place for me to sort of look at intersectionality through very specific characters. That was my goal. How'd I do?
Yeah, you did great. Yeah, that's a great way of like that's how I would have defined intersectionality. I always think of intersectionality like the simplest way is just like it's an intersection of a road, right? So it's these two places where things this is where things overlap. So, another example could be that like I take dressage lessons on an Appaloosa. Like that Appaloosa comes from the Nez Perce, who are from Idaho, and now this horse is doing this completely other thing, but those two things intersect with that horse. To be super nerdy.
I would love to see an Appaloosa doing dressage.
Oh, she's so good at it. She teaches me things all the time. And then she judges me for not doing a good job.
They're always right.
Yeah, no, Appaloosas are always right. So can you think of an example from the book that shows intersectionality in horses?
Well, I think we might, let me think. I think we might have, I don't know. Do you have something in mind?
No, I just thought it'd be interesting to ask. I mean, I just really like the idea of the barn being the place where things overlap.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I think you could talk about like June and Rory's interactions. You could talk about the different like the parts with what happens to the barn and who interacts with who gets what at the barn when Carlotta gets sicker. It's also an interesting thing that you could talk about with intersectionality. Also, I like the intersectionality of Gus, Rory's stepfather, and like bringing the culture of Topanga Canyon and the culture of Wyoming into the book.
Yeah, I think we might be approaching intersectionality in a different way, like thinking of it in a different way. I think you're thinking of just sort of these intersection of things where intersectionality is more like a, what's the word I'm looking for? In my mind, it's this, the study of how people are marginalized on varying layers. So I'm thinking of it more.
Well, it's like,
let's see. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a big story because you do have these multiple points of view and you have multiple locations and you have multiple generations. And again, this will bring me back to the three acts, how much I love a 3-act story, and that, you know, breaking the story down into acts, giving everybody knowing their trajectory in that way helped me braid everybody together in a way that I hope holds things for the reader. I kind of wanted it all to work like a fuse. You know, you have that opening chapter where all of their lives intersect for the first time. And then that takes you on the journey of how the fire starts. But yeah, the barn is definitely the reason why all of that happens. You know, the book opens with Rory and her stepfather driving to the barn because she wants to work horses super early in the morning before the sun is as hot as it can be in July, in the midst of, you know, these heat waves. So, and they come across a dead fox, and that sort of that's a metaphor that goes throughout the book is animals and what Gus has a hobby of taxidermy, and the way that we treat each other, treat animals, show respect or don't show respect. Yeah. So all of it, you know, all of it leads to the barn in the beginning, and all of it leads to the barn at the end.
One of the things that I also noticed about the book is that, you know, it could easily be portrayed, or like, you know, you could say it's a horse girl book, but it never really falls into some of the cliches that we see. It has a very complicated balance, and I was wondering what that was like to write, if that makes sense. Were you worried about the cliches of the horse girl? Like, what were you feeling about that?
Yes, no, I really was. I was trying to write against it. I think actually that section that I read for you feels like the only part where you're like, oh, underdog does well, you know, and that I wanted to, at the same time, while she does have this victory in Fresno, it's like, it changes the power dynamic between her and the Fisks, because she wasn't supposed to win and she wasn't supposed to do well, so they drop her. So it's like, you can't have that. You aren't allowed to have that. And I wanted to show that side of the horse world, that there are people who are supposed to succeed. You know, you're given these messages of like, you know, the Fisks already have everything. So they're just expected to keep having everything, including the trophies. So yeah, I was definitely writing against that stereotype. The horse on the cover briefly concerned me, but you know, once you throw a horse on the cover, you're like, that's a horse book. But,
right.
But yeah, I mean, if you put horses in a book, you definitely, people assume they're going to get certain things. I wanted to make sure that there was just everything of that time and place. You know, horses were a big part of my life, but they definitely, I think even anybody who has horses in their lives, you know, that's not the whole of your life, and it's all complicated. It is like your compass, you know, it is that thing that keeps you true and right. But it's like that thing you're always trying to get back to, you know, it's like your meditation. Like, if I can just get back to that, I'll be okay.
Right.
But I wanted all of the horse world to be in there for sure.
Yeah. The good, the bad, and the ugly for sure. The other thing, do you, have you learned a lot about writing from horses?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love that. Yeah, definitely. I'm maybe not about like literal, you know, sentences or anything, but just, you know, we talk as a parent now. I know a lot of people talk about growth mindset and, you know, what the idea that if you keep working at something, just for kids to understand that like we can constantly get better at something if we just apply ourselves. Well, that if you grow up around a barn, like you inherently know that, like, you know what it is to see a horse learn to do its paces, you know what it is to get better and better because you come every day and you do the work. So there's a doggedness that I carried over from riding into writing. Yeah, and also about human connection. You know, it's funny, once you are able to have that connection with an animal, I think you understand how deeply you can connect to your imagination, to your empathy, and that can apply itself to writing, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea of that, yeah, it's both, writing is so much revision and writing sentences that that'll never see the light of day. And
Totally.
that's so much of like how much time you spend in the barn, right?
Yeah.
And like you spend for every 2 minutes you spend in the ring, you spend 8 billion hours
5 hours.
practicing that one little movement or that one, that one lead change or whatever it is that you're working on.
Yeah.
So the other like inside baseball kind of question about horse riding that I had was Chaparral felt like a character, but she didn't overpower. And like she had this lovely balance of being a part of the plot. She was the horse that moved the plot forward, but she didn't invade it.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like to write? What was it like because she's really important through the whole book, even though like she doesn't compete again in the book.
She is. Yeah.
On screen, at least.
Totally. I wanted her to be a comforting presence and not be complicated. Just to not have to have that relationship be the one that's so uncomplicated in a way that almost makes it painful that Rory lets her go and lets Gus breed her, because you're like, turn around, girl. Like, you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
Because it's in that instant that you see Rory's capacity to take something for granted, which I don't think you've seen. But if I made Chap such a big presence in the book, then you wouldn't let me do that. Like that wouldn't read well on the page. You would be like, no.
Yeah.
I had to make sure Chap wasn't too big of a presence. In the book. Yeah.
What was balancing that out like? Was there a lot of revision?
Oh
Was
God.
there a lot of like, what was that like? Like, because it's hard. It is so hard to get that balance right. Like you're like, I want to have enough horse that it's like horsey, but not too much horse that I'm like, oh. But yeah.
I started writing the book because I think I told you I'd read that novel by Aaron Kyle, The God of Animals, and my second had just been born, and it was like the first book I read that I was just like, oh my God, I've been taken away. Like, this is amazing, and I want to get back to horses. So I wanted to get back to horses. I hadn't ridden in forever, and I wanted to write my way back there. So there was some instinct not to make the horses too much, because I knew I could fall down the research rabbit hole and I might as well be writing a textbook on 3-day eventing.
Right.
Nobody wants to read that. I'm a fiction writer. So right. I did. That's the one. Animal husbandry was something I had to do a lot of research on. I really didn't know a lot about that. But the 3-day eventing stuff, it was like I just sort of double check with a friend and be like, do I have this right? Is that how we did this? And that was it. Like I really didn't want to over research it so that I could make the book completely readable to somebody who'd never watched 3-day eventing, never heard of it. The number of times I rewrote the opening of chapters that explain 3-day eventing and what that is. There were a lot of rewrites.
Yeah, I can understand that, because it's pretty it's pretty light and airy, whereas a lot of the times trying to write about horses, let alone any sport that's not probably soccer, like I think most people,
right, yeah.
This is a little bit of an assumption, but most people understand at least the basics of how soccer works. Whereas like other sports, it's like, how do you that balance? Just it sounds like rewriting is the answer.
Yeah, rewriting is the answer, and also because I can't fall down a research rabbit hole, like you.
Right.
Like
it's like, woo, fun. Yeah. Let me scroll through 12,000 pictures of ponies on Instagram for an hour. Do you have is there somebody that is your horse reader? Like, who was the person that you're like, hey, is this right? That you called?
That's funny. Because my best friend from grad school is like my horse touchstone, but because she's continued to work, but she never did 3-day eventing. So it wasn't so much that I had her check things on that. She's worked with Buck Brannaman, and she does a lot of like groundwork with horses. So I learned a lot more just listening to her talk about these clinics she would go to. I learned a lot more about what I wasn't taught, and how much I missed out on that, because there was some, I remember I had one horse that was really lackluster, and like the way that I was supposed to get him to jump, go and do his job was I was supposed to imagine that he'd killed my family. And like,
Whoa!
this is how I was supposed to get this gelding to go. And I'm like, I never actually did that. The horse's name was Lover. Like he was,
this is so extreme. What a request. You to pretend he killed your family.
No, they didn't like mean for me to go after him or anything, but it was like having that mindset was more of a normal way to think about like attacking the cross country course, rather than the kind of work that my best friend does with horses, which is really about linking up and communication. And I just really, and that was kind of what I walked away from horses with, was knowing that that was the real value in it. It wasn't winning. It was like having that sense of self-worth and connection to an animal. That's where she works with horses. So it was, she read more drafts of this book than anyone. For sure. And like listened to me talk about it for hours. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Emily Meyer, I see you.
Right. We thank you for your grace. Right. All the readers. Right. Definitely. You'll have to have those friends that you call up and you're like, hey, can I freak out about this for a second? And it's important to have those like friends that also understand what you're talking about with horses at all.
Yeah.
And so a little bit like, was the idea of the transformation from pretending that the gelding killed your family to communication a part of writing the book? Did that inform the book?
Yeah. Ask me that again.
Let me see if I can phrase it better. So like does this new style that you learned from your reader, from your friend about communicating with the horses versus, being super aggressive with spurs or something inform how you wrote the book?
I don't know if well, I think that I was already coming to the book with that feeling about animals and the world, and that, how we treat animals and how we treat this planet has a lot to do with how we treat each other. And that was something I wanted to get across. It wasn't like I wanted to give 3-day eventing a bad name or anything. I think a lot of people approach horses and animals in a much more holistic way now. And it wasn't that we didn't then. I just have that memory of my one trainer telling me, and this horse had been hers previously too, so she knew like how lackluster it could be. But there was a book I read that was about the domestication of animals and our mistreatment of animals, and how that and big scale farming, and how you can track that with the atrocities that you've seen in the world, like that these sort of things follow a line. Like the way we have treated animals is graphable with the way we have treated one another, not being good. So I went into it with like that mindset, wanting to articulate that. So when you obviously you have this foreshadowing of trauma in the experience that Chap has with being bred in the scenes in Colorado. So yes, I was using horses as a metaphor for people, but I was also just trying to use horses as a metaphor for life, the value of life, right?
One of the things that I had a question about is that it seems that Charlotte, Rory's daughter, has a different relationship with horses than Rory does. Was that on purpose? What do you think of Charlotte's relationship with horses?
It's so funny to call her Charlotte. That's what.
Yeah, I always think of her Charlotte in my head.
That's so funny. Yeah. So, I mean, what do I think about that? I think that it's, she's not. It's a little bit more of maybe an industrial relationship. Like it's not. It's just part of the landscape of her life. Maybe industrial is the wrong word, but it's not, it doesn't have those same hierarchies to it. It's just like, this is what we do. We breed horses, we sell them to survive. So it's just there's no other way of life in her experience. She's growing up in this very small town in Wyoming, in Little Snake, Wyoming. And there's no juxtaposition against the Fisks or the Prices or what else she might have. So her relationship with horses is very matter of fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that totally fits. And then another big part of the novel was photography. And I thought it was really interesting. I was wondering, Rory doesn't ever take pictures of horses. Like, that is not a thing. Whereas like my one photography class, that was all I took pictures of. Like, but that was also totally.
Well, she takes them at Ram Tap, and she does take them on trail ride. She does take them up the hill. So she takes a lot of pictures of her friends, and and she takes pictures of the taxidermied animals. So, but her focus is definitely Vivian.
Yeah.
There's heat to that storyline. Her taking pictures,
right,
of the horses is not maybe as interesting,
right? I like want to talk about that a little bit, like the way that that's a like kind of a, I wouldn't say it's a theme. I'm trying to think of the word, but it wouldn't be a trope either. But the idea of like moving away from horses or something that you were super passionate about. For that first significant other, for that first major crush. But I'm trying to figure out how to ask the question. What do you think? I don't know, maybe this is the question. What do you think makes some people stick with something when that person shows up? And what do you think makes some people pull away from it? Or at least in Rory's case?
I think in Rory's case and maybe a little bit of my own experience, because I did just have to abruptly stop writing, but not because of any love affair. But I think in that instance, it's like horses have taught Rory how to love. And what do you do when you love horses? It's all consuming, right? Like that's all you do. So when she has this new opportunity or this new interest in Vivian, it's in conflict to being at the barn. She follows her heart or her obsession in that moment. It's sort of like this fork in the road happens. It's just convenient for her to let go of riding in favor of pursuing this other shiny object that's maybe not as healthy for her.
Right. We talked a little bit about this when we were in our screen test yesterday, but I was really like, we were geeking out about it a little bit about what would it be like if Vivian was into horses?
Oh yeah. I started to tell you that if I really did want to get Vivian riding horses. Like I really loved the idea of this beautiful Vivian, and being one with horses, and it doesn't work. And it didn't work at all. Like every time I started moving her towards the barn, and it's because she's too self-centered,
Yeah.
There's a level of humility that you need to have to be around horses that it wouldn't have worked. Like she could not have put down the mirror.
No, she couldn't.
Yeah.
Do you think it's, I don't know, like I've seen that. Do you think it's possible so that horses can teach you to be left self-centered? Or is it,
I do. I think so. Yeah. I mean, if you really commit yourself, I like to believe people can grow and change.
Right.
I didn't have the patience to do that for Vivian, but
no. I also, I don't think it would have worked. She wasn't there because that would be like 45-year-old Vivian.
Right. It's a while.
She would be like comfortable enough to be like, hey, I totally asked for that transition wrong, and it was my fault.
Right? No, there's no way. She'd have been irritated and thrown her hair back and gone on.
Right. The other thing that's like, what has it been like having a book come out in 2020?
Oh man. Well, we went on shelter in place, I think 4 weeks before this book came out. March, maybe it was 5 weeks, March 17th or something was our first day of complete lockdown here. And the book came out April 21st. So it was like I and my publisher had that 5 weeks to cancel my tour, the bookstores were already canceling the tour and figure out new ways of doing this. And I still, even it's so nice to be able to talk to somebody else, but there are moments of like, I have no audience feedback, like you can't read the room at all. I'm like, how's this going? That's the strangest part. Obviously, we're all missing each other in this odd world we're living in. And it's been super strange to have California just more and more on fire as the weeks tick by. That's been completely eerie and unsettling. So, yeah,
what does that feel like? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was going to say, I started writing the book 10 years ago, and it was like, I lived through this big event, and now I'm like, that fire was 18,000 acres, and that was huge to us.
It was little. Yeah.
Like, oh, that's
sorry. I'm from Colorado. Oh, it's so little. Like, it's such a big fire. And I'm just like, wow, that's dark.
Right? It's crazy.
Yeah. Right? That is crazy. What has it been like to have a book about fire with all of this fire? I know that's not a very exciting question, but I keep thinking about it.
It's so hard because I'm like, God, I hope this isn't triggering for people, but I didn't.
Right?
It's not. I knew even as we were getting ready, I was finishing final edits. I was finishing final edits when the Paradise Fire was burning, and writing my acknowledgments during the campfire. Oh, the campfire was the Paradise Fire. Anyway, I get these names mixed up. But the 2 years in a row, as I was finishing edits and as I was finishing revising acknowledgments, there were new fires burning. And it just became abundantly clear that California is just in a whole new place with climate change. A lot quicker than I had ever anticipated. I think than anybody had ever anticipated. I think I read yesterday we're 500 times more likely to have fires than we were 20 years ago.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it's not, yes, there's drought, but there's also, and part of what I wanted to get across in the book, you never fully know who starts the fire. I'm giving away the ending, sorry. But I want that sense of like, we are all responsible. Like we all play a part in how these things happen and how much we pay attention to them. So you can sort of be complacent, or you can wake up and do your best to make a difference. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm sitting I think we talked about this at the beginning. I woke up basically on Mars. I'm in the Bay Area now, and it's just, our skies are completely orange today. It's so strange and unnerving. We've had the lights in the house on almost the whole day because otherwise it's completely dark outside. Just
oh my gosh. Are you able to keep writing?
I have been writing. I've been working on a new book. So it's the thing that's keeping me sane. Now that my kids are back on Zoom school, I have some time to write and work on the book I've been working on for a little while. So yeah, no horses in that book.
What has writing been like during all this? What is it? Has the process changed? Is it at different times? Is it?
Well, I mean, I think there's some of that. Your writers are always like, what's the point? Like, why do I do this? Nobody cares.
Right.
And that's
I feel like existential angst is an occupational hazard.
Occupational hazard that is completely compounded by the world we're living in now, right?
Yeah.
I just am not sure if it means enough, but then I have to remember that art is a big part of how we have these conversations and how we make small change. So trying to believe it will make a difference. That's how you keep showing up and keep doing what you can. Yeah.
Well, it's good that you're still writing. I've talked to some writers who are like, I can't write a word. Other people who are like, I've written like 8,000 pages today, and I'm just like, okay, we're not friends anymore.
Yeah, no. I'm not friends with them either. Well, I didn't write for the first few months. I mean, I was just sort of trying to get the tour together and learn new ways of doing this. But yeah, I have been able to lately, partly out of a feeling of desperation and, wanting to feel some meaning and connection to the page again. So,
yeah. I feel like existential dread, often my existential dread about horses is the same as my existential dread about writing.
Really?
Yeah. Like, or you'll just be like, oh, I didn't. I remember when I was young and I was working on a horse farm, I accidentally left a hose in a water bucket on a hot day and it siphoned it all out.
Oh no!
And I felt so like I obsessed about it the same way that I obsessed over, I don't know,
Right.
whatever it is that I was obsessing over.
Spelling mistake or yeah, no, it's gonna be
Right? Oh, right. So what are you working on right now? Are you ready to talk about it, or is it still door closed?
Am I ready
Let's
to
see if
talk
the
about
door's
it? Well, I'll
closed.
tell you, it has 3 things in it.
Oh yeah, the 3 has returned. Fibonacci's theorem.
No, it's definitely
3-day
a 3.
eventing.
Yeah.
3 strides of a canter. I would just keep geeking out. Yeah, so it has 3 things. All right, we'll start with that.
I will say it's much. This book is so much about a specific time and place, and this one is much more about interiority and women's lives and friendships. So a little different in that way.
Yeah. I mean, a little different, but also like
similar.
Would fit together. Yeah. Will you ever write about horses again?
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, hopefully my life I'll keep intersecting with horses over and over.
Right. We'll use my strange definition.
No, it's literal.
Super good. Yeah. I stole mine from Michael Perry, he's a writer out of northern Wisconsin who wrote his last book about Montaigne of all people.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Michael Perry.
And so Michael Perry was talking about like Montaigne and the intersection of Chance the Rapper and his life and like his own life as a farmer.
Oh, wow. I love that.
About intersectionality. Yeah, shout out to Michael Perry, I guess. So that's where I always think about the definition. Well, I think that is all the questions that I have. Thank you. We also have we put up the link on the bottom of your screen for the signed copies of your books at Book Passage, which is a fantastic bookstore. Kate also recommended that you can also order her book at Women and Children First, which is here in Chicago, where I live, and where Kate has sometimes lived. Where did you ride in Chicago?
Well, that was actually just a birthday party. I can't even remember where it was, but it was, I don't know if you know the author Melissa Pritchard, but it was her daughter's birthday party. Oh, look her up. She's an amazing author. And she was like, the mother I looked up to as a novelist was like, wow, she won an award as a short story writer. And like, she kept writing. And anyway, so it was her daughter's birthday party. And that was the only time I wrote in Chicago. And then we moved to LA soon after that. So
yeah.
somewhere in Evanston, I think.
Yeah, my trainer, I ride in the suburbs. And my trainer was telling me that Pritzker's daughter rides. J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois.
Yeah.
And his daughter is a big equestrian. And I was like, cool, that's awesome. So, yeah.
There you go, everybody.
Well, I think we'll wrap up now. Thank you guys so much for coming. Kate, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. I hope that everybody else reads the book. We will be back again next month on the second Wednesday of the month. And that's all for now. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. Bye.
Bye.